everyone. Michelle Seidling here with another episode of Food Experience Unplugged. Today, we'll explore nutritional interventions for preventing and dealing with cancer. Here to help us do that is registered dietitian and cancer survivor Martha Tettenborn. This podcast is available on multiple platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others. Please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to be informed as new episodes become available. If you enjoyed today's episode or any of our episodes, please rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. As always, be sure to check out our website at foodexperienceunplugged.com for some resources as you begin your health journey. Martha Tettenborn, welcome to Food Experience Unplugged.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here and talking to you, Michelle.
Oh, fantastic. And lovely to have you here, Martha, as a cancer survivor, a registered dietitian, a book author, and someone with an amazing story. Will you introduce yourself and share your story with us?
Sure. So most people can tell from my voice that I'm Canadian. That's what everyone tells me anyways. I'm a registered dietitian and have been for about 35 years. And I've worked in a lot of different aspects of dietetics, but usually with adults or healthy aging seniors. Right now, I work in long-term care. I was just cruising along, being a self-employed, normal, everyday busy person with lots of activities and stuff. A couple of years ago, when I suddenly discovered that I had a really huge ovarian cyst, and I had that examined and the decision was made to do surgery. And 6 days after I had it removed laparoscopically, I was called back and told that I had ovarian cancer. So it came entirely out of the blue. Nobody had any concept that this cyst would turn out to be cancerous. The blood marker that they do for ovarian cancer was only marginally elevated, and it's not a terribly good test anyways. So literally nobody thought it was a problem, which is why I agreed to have it ruptured through a little laparoscopic incision and then just sort of sucked out like a deflated balloon. But in doing that, unfortunately, that was considered a spill. So I was very fortunate that the cyst was so big it had to be addressed right away because it turned out to be stage 1 ovarian cancer. And ovarian cancer is a really serious cancer, mainly because about 75% of women who are diagnosed with ovarian cancer are diagnosed in either stage 3 or stage 4. So it's a really, they call it the cancer that whispers, because a lot of the symptoms of ovarian cancer are very nondescript, kind of non-direct. And they're just the kind of things that a lot of busy women will just kind of write off as being normal. They're just, their stress or their menopause or something that, they're just not really taking the time to be in touch with their bodies, or we've just never learned to be in touch with our bodies. So anyways, it was stage 1 ovarian cancer, but spilled. So it was highly recommended that I have further surgery to complete the standard of care for ovarian cancer, which is a hysterectomy and so on. And then have chemotherapy. So the tumor was gone before I knew I had a tumor. I never had to sit with the knowledge that there was cancer growing in my body. It was gone by the time I knew I had cancer. So that's a little different than some other people's experiences. But at the same time, what we were chasing were individual cancer cells. So it's like mold spore that just kind of poofs out into the air and can land anywhere, right? And that was sort of what we were after with the chemotherapy. So as a dietitian, and as a dietitian who had veered off the beaten path and into low carb and keto diet several years ago, I was very much about not just following blindly into the conventional treatment path. I wanted to know more. And so I did a deep dive into Dr. Google and PubMed and the research around cancer and chemotherapy and ovarian cancer. Watched a lot of videos of, people who've put up their own stories and read blogs and that sort of stuff. And what I discovered was rather mind-blowing in that there was a whole field of cancer theory that I didn't know anything about, and it was the field of cancer metabolism, as opposed to the genetic theory of cancer. That cancer has a disordered or damaged metabolic process, and so it fuels itself differently. Well, anytime you're talking about fuel, then you can impact that through what you put into your body for fuel, which is nutrition, right? We're back to nutrition. And lo and behold, there were things that I could do to impact on how I fueled my body and therefore how I fueled the potential cancer. Um, and there's this information was known 100 years ago, but it got lost. And the entire sort of field of cancer research got veered off into genetics and genetic alterations in about the 1940s or 50s. And since then, the whole idea of cancer metabolism was kind of, thrown on the dustbin of history, sort of thing. It doesn't help that most of the research in that area was done by German scientists before and during the Second World War. And that, in fact, one scientist, Otto Warburg, won the Nobel Prize in 1931 for describing this abnormal metabolism of cancer cells. But most things German were not really considered with much respect after the war, and it doesn't help that this, particularly Dr. Warburg, was quite a controversial character, and so the research just kind of got lost and has only really been rediscovered in the last 20 years, and researchers have started working with this theory of cancer metabolism and what can we do, how can it impact on cancer treatment. And it can impact it in an amazing way. And that's kind of what I discovered and why I ended up pretty much sailing through my chemotherapy with minimal side effects and then writing a book about it. And here I am.
Oh, and we are glad that you're here. Wow, that is amazing. I'm just to kind of backtrack a little bit. It's fantastic that you caught it at stage one. Maybe that cyst was just kind of a little alert button going off, so to speak.
It was a really big alert button. By the time I found it, it was 16 centimeters across, so that's about 6 inches. And by the time I had it removed, it had continued to grow, and they took 1.5 liters, so that's about a quart and a half of fluid out of the cysts. There was 2 of them actually, out of the cysts when they drained them to remove them with the first surgery. So it was basically like being about 5 months pregnant.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
that was an interesting summer of, having to pull up my waistband when I sat down in a chair because the cyst was actually above the level of my navel by that point. So
Wow. Yes. So how did you, what were your feelings? Okay, you're having the cyst taken care of, and then a short time later, hey, guess what? You have ovarian cancer. What were your thought processes at that time?
oh, it's devastating at the time. I was 6 days post-surgery from the first surgery. Like I say, it was laparoscopic, so little tiny incisions, but you're really messed up inside. So I was very sore, but I was just at home, and I got a phone call from my surgeon's office, and they said the surgeon would like to see you. And this wasn't the plan. I was supposed to see her in 4 to 6 weeks. Um, she would like to see you. Come tomorrow morning. Bring your husband. And
Wow.
I just kind of went, "Oh dear." I know well, that's not exactly what I said. It was something a little more blue than that, but um, I know exactly what that means, right? And so I felt like a deer in the headlights. My husband came in from wherever he was outside, and I immediately told him what was going on, and he just kind of stared at me, and he knew exactly what it meant too. At that point, we didn't know anything about staging or what we were looking at. We just knew that that was not good. Um, I say in the book that becoming someone with cancer is like becoming a parent. You are never, ever again not a person who's had cancer. Just like you become a parent as soon as you get pregnant, and then you have a baby, and then you have children, and you have teenagers, and you have adult children, and your children may even die, but you never stop being a parent. That's part of your identity, right? And cancer's kind of like that. It's not anything that will ever 100% go away because now it's just becomes part of your identity. So you have to come to grips with that. And um, And you also have to tell other people, and that's really hard too. That's really hard. What I found was, first I had to come to grips with the fact that part of my personal identity was being really healthy. I mean, I was a dietitian that was in a private practice trying to help other people be super healthy, and I was 58, and that was me. I was super healthy, right? Nothing ached. I don't take any medications. I've had no illnesses. I've got a great family history. My mom had breast cancer, but that's another story. I didn't feel like I was at increased risk because of her medical history, and so I had to come to grips with the fact that I wasn't that healthy person,
Mhm.
and that really rocked my world in terms of identity. And then I had to tell people, and the people that you love, you have to tell in person. And when you tell people, they're devastated, and then it becomes your job to absorb their emotion. And that's really hard. I didn't know about that before. It's like when you tell somebody that you have been diagnosed with cancer and a whole thing goes through their head, and you can see that in their eyes and how devastated they are, and then you have to kind of absorb that discomfort or that misery or whatever it is. And I would end up going, but you know, I'm so good. Like it was stage one. You know, I would have to kind of almost comfort them, but I'm the one with cancer. It's weird. And then I had to put it out to my acquaintances, so the other people in my world. So, that's my workplace, my coworkers. I mean, I was going to go through chemotherapy. I was going to become bald. I wasn't going to be able to hide this, right? And I didn't want to hide it. That's just not kind of who I am. Um, so yeah, I literally wrote a letter to my coworkers and stuck it on the fridge in the nursing home where I work, and said this is what's happening to me in the next few months, and I love working with you people, but my schedule is going to be weird, and I'm going to look weird, and please send good thoughts my way, sort of thing. Um, and the strangest thing happened. People that I just considered the most superficial of acquaintances would stop by my office to say they'd read the letter and to wish me well, and like it was, and all the way through my treatment, people that I really just say considered kind of, I just saw them once in a blue, sort of thing, and they would ask how I was doing, and they'd like seriously want to know, and then other people didn't. Other people had to back away from me, and I don't fault anybody for that, because you can't know what a cancer diagnosis means to somebody else, right? You can't know if maybe they lost a family member, or they've had it themselves, or something has happened, or they just don't know how to deal with people who aren't well, and so they back away and they just kind of disappear out of your life, and you can't fault them for it. It's their journey, right? You have to
Sure.
live your journey.
Yeah. I guess part of your cancer treatment was managing those relationships. You're building some relationships, others you may part from.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
It's You don't think about that aspect of it when you get started. It's part of the reason that when I wrote my book, part of the subtitle says using a kick-ass attitude to power through cancer, because attitude and spirit have a lot to do with how you get through cancer treatment.
Sure. Absolutely. Now, turning back for a moment to those nutritional interventions, you were already a dietitian. You thought you were already eating healthy and being healthy. So, what tweaks or what adjustments did you feel you needed to make following, the cancer treatment and ongoing things?
Well, I was already eating low carb, not keto. I dabbled in keto. I dabbled in a variety of things over the years, but lots of N=1 experiments, of course. But I was eating low carb, relatively clean. Um, like I say, I didn't consider myself to be an unhealthy person at all. I didn't eat a lot of junk. In the last 5 years or so, 5 to 10 years, prior to that, we ate a pretty standard North American diet. Um, But when I discovered this field of cancer metabolism, and the fact that, among other things, cancer has an inability to burn much except glucose, sugar, blood sugar. It does not manage well burning fatty acids or ketones for the most part. And it's also one of the hallmarks of cancer is that it cannot turn off its metabolism. It cannot slow down. It's got this insatiable drive to grow. That's what part of what defines cancer. And so it can't downregulate or slow down its need for energy when the fuel supply is low, unlike the rest of your body. Healthy cells, if you don't have fuel, will go into kind of a quiescent or maintenance mode sort of stage, waiting for the next influx of fuel. But cancer cells can't do that. They require glucose or blood sugar only, pretty much only. They can also burn a simple amino acid called glutamine, but mostly glucose. And they love it when you've got lots of carbohydrates in your diet, lots of sugar in your blood, and lots of insulin in your blood. And your body will release insulin in response to carbohydrates in your diet. So if you eat a lot of carbs, whether that's sugar or starches, it could be bread, it could be potatoes, it could be candy, it could be, cookies, it could be fruit, even if you're overdoing fruit. If you eat a lot of carbs, your body produces a lot of insulin in response to those carbs. And the cancer cells have more glucose receptors and more insulin receptors on their surface than normal cells, because they really need those things to pull lots of glucose into the blood, into the cell, the cancer cell, so that it can burn it for fuel. And it needs fuel for its unending desire for growth, right? So I was already I was well fat adapted, I would say. I've been eating low carb for years, and I don't spend a lot of time worrying about whether or not I'm in ketosis, but I'm certainly capable of going for hours without bonking with low blood sugars or any of that kind of stuff. So I know I'm fat adapted. But when I started down this path of realizing that the cancer needed the sugar, then of course I was a little I became stricter about being on a low carb diet. And particularly as I went through chemotherapy, I stayed on a strict ketosis diet or ketogenic diet the entire time. And I was in ketosis. I did blood sugar and ketone monitoring using a little blood meter to make sure that I was in ketosis the whole time. So that was sort of during the entire 5 months of my chemo. And then I fasted during the actual chemotherapy treatments, also based on research that I did. And that's what I really wrote the book about, was using the fasting, the keto diet, but also the targeted, time-targeted fasting around chemo, so that you get those benefits of quieting down your healthy cells and stressing your cancer cells, and the impact that would have on your chemo.
Okay. And will you tell us a little bit about that targeted fasting?
Sure. So this was based on the work of several researchers who have been really looking a lot at cancer metabolism in the last 20 years. One is Dr. Thomas Seyfried I believe he's in Boston. And he's done a lot of research on the keto diet and cancer cells, and the difference between genetic versus metabolic abnormalities in cancer cells. And he has devised this theory that he calls the press pulse theory. It's hard to say. The press is putting pressure on the cancer cells by depriving them of their fuel. And the pulse is a cancer treatment. So if you can make the cells stressed through the press, which is the low carb ketogenic diet, and then you pulse them with a treatment, whether that's chemotherapy or radiation or high dose vitamin C or whatever, your hyperbaric oxygen. There's a variety of things that are used. The traditional therapies are chemo and radiation, of course. That the cells are more susceptible to the pulse because they're being pressured or pressed. So his work helped to define sort of the idea behind the fasting. And then a lot of research has been done with chemo and fasting in particular by Dr. Walter Longo out in California. And he did a lot of work to, number one, prove that chemotherapy is not adversely affected by using fasting. And he found the same thing as Dr. Seyfried, that actually chemo is more effective in a person who is fasted as opposed to someone who's fed. But what he really found was that side effects were lessened. in people who were fasted as opposed to fed. So not only is the chemo more effective on the cancer, but it's less effective on the healthy cells in your body, which means you have fewer side effects. Because chemo is, for the most part, is targeted at the markers of fast metabolism, because that's cancer has no off switch, right? So so the chemo will look for, there's different steps in the process that it looks for, but basically it's looking for fast metabolism. And those are the cells that it goes after, and it disrupts that. And that's what causes its effectiveness. In an adult human, and pediatrics is something different, and I don't dabble in pediatrics. That's an expertise for other people. But in an adult, we don't have very many parts of our body that are still actively growing. Most of us is in a maintenance phase. The parts that are actively still growing are things like our hair follicles that are constantly putting out new material. Our bone marrow, the inside of our long bones, where we produce all of our blood components like white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, all that stuff. That's actively still going on all the time. Skin is constantly being regenerated, and the lining of our GI tract and our mucous membranes and stuff, those are constantly being replenished. So those are the growth areas, and those are the areas where we get side effects from chemotherapy, right? So if we can make those healthy cells go quiet by using fasting, both pre-chemo and post-chemo, so right around the time of the actual chemo treatment, you quiet down your healthy cells. They go into that, I call it stealth mode, where they're kind of, quiet. And then the chemo just goes right over top of them. It misses them. And it goes straight for the cancer, which is sitting there with big flashing red lights on it going, pick me, because it's the only part that's still really actively showing those high metabolic rate markers.
That's
And I
because
can
of the
tell you that.
glucose, perhaps.
What's that?
Because of that glucose that the cancer cells are taking in.
Well, because they don't have the ability to shut down. That's one of the hallmarks of cancer, is this uncontrolled growth, right? They have no quiet mode. So I, based on the work of Dr. Longo and Dr. Seyfried and so on, I devised what I call my keto or my chemo fasting protocol, and that's what the book is about. And it involved, for me, a 72-hour fast. So I fasted for 36 hours prior to my chemo treatment. That was just to slow down my metabolism and put my healthy cells into quiet mode. And then I fasted through my chemo, which in my case was about a 12-hour day. And then I fasted for 24 hours afterwards. So while I had that very active drug at its highest levels in my bloodstream, I was keeping myself fasted so that my healthy cells stayed low. Okay. And so by doing that, I was able to avoid almost all of the nausea. I had almost no nausea. I had no emesis, no throwing up at all. I never had mouth sores or any of the major GI problems. The only thing I got into was some constipation, and that was really my own fault. And I figured out how to deal with that food-wise, and that's in the book as well. And of course, I did lose my hair, and those are second week sort of symptoms. But I never had muscle aches and pains, and I never had any peripheral neuropathy or nerve damage. And I was terrified of having nerve damage, numbness in your fingers and toes and things like that can take months to recover after chemo. So basically, each chemo treatment, I would have maybe 4 or 5 kind of low energy days. I was never horizontal. I was never like out, have to stay in bed. Nothing like that. I never missed a meal that I didn't intentionally miss, of course. I never missed making a meal. I mean, in my house, that's something I like to do. And so I would get up. It might only be bacon and eggs for supper or something like really simple, but I always had the energy to do that and to at least move around a little bit. And after 4 or 5 days, I would start, about day 5, I'd start feeling my energy coming back up. And then I'd have 2 weeks of pretty well normal. I mean, I wasn't running marathons or anything, but I had a pretty normal energy level, and I was able to continue working and, doing activities and stuff. So it was a pretty amazing experience, given that that was not supposed to be what happened with that kind of chemo.
Yeah, it definitely is. With the side effects, does it normally last for several weeks after the chemo?
Well, most people get like about a week of feeling really lousy. and having to, deal with nausea and possibly throwing up and then some of the other stuff like the aches and pains and things. Um, I say I would end up with usually about 4 days and no emesis, never. Um, Minimal nausea. Usually the nausea happened on day 3, which was after I had started eating again, like the morning after I started eating.
Sure.
But no, that the chemo drug itself stays in your system for a lengthy period of time, and I didn't get that the first go around. My drug cycle was every 3 weeks, and that's because it literally takes 3 weeks for that drug to process through your system. And in the second week, you sort of hit the powerful, some more powerful effects. And that's when things like your bone marrow gets impacted. That's when your hair follicles get impacted. So, I mean, I still had those, but not nearly to the same effect. My blood values dropped somewhat, but never low enough that I required Neupogen or any of those drugs to help maintain my white blood cell count. Every single time they bounced back in time for me to have my next chemo, like it bounced back into an adequate range. Um, and it didn't take more than about 6 months, 8 months, I guess, before my immune system was completely back on track after the end of chemotherapy, which is less than some people find. So I really feel like the things that I did made an impact on those long range things as well. And I mean, the moment that drug was out of my body, like at the end of the 3rd week of the last cycle, I started sprouting hair again. Like it was like literally within days, I started seeing, just this tiny fuzz on my completely bald head. Uh, every single one of those hairs was white. I thought I was going to be as white as snow, but the gray came back too, so that's okay.
Oh, yes. I really enjoy and I love your determination and your persistence in, okay, I'm a dietitian already. I've got to really get into the nuances of, okay, what is it about keto and really refining the process and then refining the fasting process and really delving into the research, which you mentioned a lot of it was lost, but that there had been that rebirth. So there was enough research for
Yeah.
you to go on to make those changes.
Yeah, and I was flabbergasted that as a dietitian with all this experience, I didn't know about any of this. I mean, I started university the year that the McGovern report came out and the whole low fat for everybody thing was cutting edge science, heart health hypothesis, cholesterol, all that stuff. And so that's how I practiced most of my career. And all we're really told about cancer as dietitians is help your people to not lose weight. Give them whatever it takes to not lose weight. And that's where the commercial nutritional supplement products come in that are made with, highly processed proteins and sugars and industrial seed oils and all this crap. And never did anybody talk about the fact that cancer is actually, supported by high sugar foods. We would suggest that people, if increase the nutrient or the calorie density of something. So if you made a piece of toast, put butter and peanut butter and honey on your toast and make one piece of toast into, 500 calories instead of 100 calories. That was all we really had to offer people. And that's why I was angry that nobody knew this. Why didn't I know this? Why doesn't the world know this? That's why I started writing a blog, to start sharing this information, putting it out there, because I know that when I got diagnosed, I went looking for other people's stories. I wanted to know what other people's experiences were. So I put it online as a blog. And then a few people kind of went, you should write a book. And it's like, okay. Um, I had lots of time that winter. I had given up a lot of my life responsibilities, handed off a lot of hats to other people for the period of time that I was dealing with cancer, about 8 months, I guess. And so I had the time. It was winter to work on writing the book. So I had a manuscript done sort of by the following spring. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That now you've told us a lot about with slowing the cancer growth and what you did with that. Now, on the flip side, what about preventing cancer to begin with? Ideally, we'll prevent it, but we can. Are there some things that we can do to do that to starve it off? I suppose.
Well, yeah. starving it off is different than not allowing it to develop in the first place, right? So, I mean, that's the
Sure.
ideal place is you keep your body in a situation where cancer doesn't have a chance to really get a hold. They say that we're developing cancer cells all the time, but most of the time our own system just takes care of it and nothing ever comes of it. So I guess in terms of prevention, there'd be a few things. I mean, this isn't obviously my area of expertise, but one would be eating real food. So that means not processed food out of a box, not things that came from monocrop culture, agriculture like corn and soy and North American non-organic wheat. All those things that have a lot of pesticide and herbicide residues on them. So real food, meaning meat, vegetables, fruit, organic grains if you're going to use grains, dairy products. If you can use organic, great, but you don't have to in order to still be in a better place than if you were using a lot of processed foods. If your socioeconomic status is such that you have to choose non-organic products, then fine. It's really just more important that you eat real things. Cook at home. Um, Start from fresh as much as you can. And yeah, so real food, low in sugar, modest in overall carbohydrates, and avoid industrial seed oils. That would be another really big one. Um, there's good fats. In fact, the low carb diet is based on healthy fats. And there's I don't want to use the word bad because it's not a moral judgment. They're fats that have never ever been part of the human nutritional supply until the last 100 years. And that would be things like corn oil, soy oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil, sunflower, safflower. So the ones that come from seed crops that have been processed using a lot of heat and a lot of solvents to make a highly chemicalized product. So fats that come from animals are part of the human food chain for millions of years, and fats that are pressed out of an oil or pressed out of fruit in a cold pressed method. So that would be things like coconut oil, olive oil, or avocado oil, where it's a fruit that you just squeeze, as opposed to using solvents to extract it, like chemicals. So that would be another big one is the industrial seed oils. And then if you can try and achieve a healthy body weight, because obesity has been linked to a lot of different cancers. And the obesity is linked through its link with inflammation. And so if you have any sort of inflammatory processes going on in your body, do what you can to address those. That's helpful too. And be active. There's a lot of information that supports being physically active, even if it's walking. I don't want to say even as though it sounds like that's a minimal amount, but get outside in nature, connect to nature, put your bare feet on the ground in the summer and connect and get out in the sun and let the sun beat on your face. Those are all things that are that bring us back to being what humans are supposed to be.
Absolutely. Wow. Now, did you, with these different steps throughout your cancer journey, did you feel that these things are doable? And in this case, you're kind of managing, but on the prevention end as well with various steps.
I think so. I think we have to set our priorities. We really have to look at what our priorities are. And even someone who lives in the most urban setting can probably find a piece of grass somewhere, um, or a tree to stand under, or some sunshine to get out into, or to go for a walk and connect with community, and so that you have a peaceful feeling in your heart, if you want to call it that, contentment with life and gratitude, consciously cultivating a sense of gratitude and joy in your life, because I really believe that we we bathe our body in emotions through hormones, but also through who knows what. I don't think we figured it all out yet, but positive um, emotions like gratitude and love and connection and community will keep us in a positive and a healthier place than negativity and anger and loneliness. Um, and complaint. And I think we really need to cultivate that spirit of health as well.
I love that. I love that your mindset, that whole shift that you've made to to that positive attitude and that, hey, I'm going to do this and I'm committed to my health. That's fantastic.
That's the Kickass Attitude. I should probably say what the name of my book is, because I called it Hacking Chemo, because it's about using traditional cancer treatments. I'm not saying don't, like, this isn't an alternative therapy sort of book, but it's tweaking it and hacking it to make it more effective. And then the subtitle is Using Ketogenic Diet, Therapeutic Fasting, and a Kick-Ass Attitude to Power Through Cancer. And that's sort of where the kick-ass attitude part comes from. You need to feel empowered, and you need to feel positive, and not look not look at it as you're a hopeless victim of cancer. I'm not, I refuse to be a victim. And you're not necessarily a warrior either. I didn't like the warrior mentality, because being battle ready is incredibly stressful. It's
Mhm.
like bathing your body in stress hormones, and I'm all revved up and I'm going to fight this, right? But being empowered, and looking at everything from a very positive place. I quote Marie Kondo, the decluttering guru from
Mhm.
Japan, that little tiny little lady who, she the magic art of cleaning, of tidying up, I think it's called. Anyway, she says, look at the things in your life, and if they don't spark joy, thank them for their role in your life and let them go. And that's kind of how I thought about my cancer. It's like, okay, this has brought me to a whole different place in my life than I expected to be. And for that, I'm really thankful. I've authored a book. I'm getting information out to the world that I hope will help people. And but I can let this go. Thank you. Done.
Oh, fantastic. Now, on that note, how can people get in contact with you and order your book, of course?
Well, I have a website. It's very simple. It's just my name, marthatettenborn.com. And the blog is there. There's links to my book, which is available through Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Chapters in Canada, and it's available both digitally and as a paperback. I also will work with people if they want some support. Now, as a dietitian, my license limits me in terms of being a dietitian to my own province and a few other Canadian provinces. But as a health coach, I call myself a doula, the cancer doula, because a doula is a person who helps somebody who's going through a process. So they don't, if you think of a birth doula supports the mother going through the process. She doesn't birth the baby. That's the midwife's job, but the doula is there for the mother. And there are death doulas, and I like to think of what I'm doing as being a cancer doula, helping people through the process. I provide education and advocacy and support, and a listening ear and a shoulder to cry on, or whatever, virtually, of course. But yeah, so I'm willing to work with people as well. And there's a contact form on the website as well for that.
Okay, wonderful. We will include all of those things in the show notes. Martha, it's been incredible to hear your journey and to hear your positive attitude and going forward and making those changes. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. It's been a wonderful conversation.